Is the left-right political spectrum an outdated relic of the past? What happens when we judge policies based on ideological loyalty instead of whether they actually work? Does the left versus right divide oversimplify the complexity of modern politics? And if so, could a new political paradigm make politics more effective and less toxic? All of that and more in today's video. Does it still make sense to categorize every policy as left or right? Take the right to repair movement. It's a policy that garners support from across the political spectrum. Progressives see it as a fight against corporate monopolies, while conservatives and libertarians defend it as a fundamental property right. Environmentalists champion it as a way to reduce e-waste, while small business advocates see it as a blow against industry giants hoarding repair access. But despite its broad appeal, right to repair doesn't fit neatly into the left-right divide. It exposes the flaws in a framework that forces every issue into an ideological binary. If policies that shape our lives defy these outdated labels, why do we still cling to them? Unfortunately, due to the polarization of modern politics, the more a policy defies easy classification as left-wing or right-wing, the more likely it is to be overlooked in political discourse. Why? As previously mentioned in my video on cognitive bias, humans are psychologically bound to observe and theorize within the confines of dominant paradigms. While much has already been written by thinkers like Thomas Kuhn about how this phenomenon impacts fields like science, wherein researchers become blind to anomalies that seem irrelevant to the veracity or falsehood of existing theories, it has a role to play in politics as well. People are prone not just to interpreting problems and conflicts in light of their political ideology, but also to unconsciously overlooking problems entirely that don't fit within the dominant paradigm of an ideological struggle between left and right. Paradigm bias becomes especially pronounced in politics due to the impact of political beliefs on identity. As mentioned in my video about navigating politics ethically, people more often than not base political identity on psychological predispositions rather than rational policy analysis. The results, as the psychologist Jonathan Haidt explains, is a form of tribalism that undermines meaningful policy discussion. Why do people enthusiastically embrace left-wing and right-wing identities in the first place? According to Haidt, left-wing and right-wing identity labels act as social signifiers of value emphasis. The left is more likely to self-report that they value fairness, empathy, tolerance, and care, while the right is more likely to self-report that they value sanctity, order, discipline, and loyalty. Emphasis on self-reporting, since there's often more overlap in these values that members of both sides of the spectrum perceive. However, while such generalized identity labels may help people find individuals of a like mind, they often do more to obscure reality than effectively communicate it. Where did the concept of left and right-wing political identities come from? The terms originate from the French Revolution, when the seating arrangement of parliamentarians in the National Assembly placed those who supported the revolution on the left of the president, while those who favored tradition were placed on the right. While such terms may have been useful at the time to describe the divide between revolutionaries and traditionalists, today they are so far removed from their original meaning that they only serve to obscure the complexity of modern political ideologies. For example, while most neoconservatives would identify themselves as right-wing, their defense of democracy, meritocracy, civil liberty, free markets, and individualism would have placed them directly at odds with the perspectives of most right-wingers at the time of the French Revolution, who would have promoted monarchy, aristocracy, censorship, strict regulation of merchants, and powerful social institutions. Historically, the left-right spectrum was a measurement of attitudes towards change and preservation. However, as the economist Friedrich Hayek points out, the spectrum fails to effectively capture these distinctions today. Reformist conservatives are grouped with reactionaries, while gradualist progressives are placed alongside revolutionaries, turning the spectrum more into a battle between the center and the extremes than a true battle between left and right. To make sense of this ambiguity, left-wing and right-wing political ideologies have been ascribed an ever greater number of ideological positions, even though these positions can at times be contradictory. Fascism, for example, was a revolutionary movement that sought to overthrow existing institutions to establish a new world order based on hierarchy, military might, and social order. However, despite its thorny relationship with tradition, ranging from a selective embrace to outright animosity, it is universally described as right-wing. Likewise, progressivism, despite universally being described as left-wing due to its emphasis on social justice and economic equality, is often illiberal in its approach to a variety of issues, perhaps most notably its approach to free speech, meritocracy, and, on occasion, populism. As the political scientist Andrew Heywood points out, the left-right dichotomy fails to account for real and meaningful distinctions between positions across the spectrum. Likewise, it completely fails to categorize a wide swath of positions, including libertarianism, technocracy, post-liberalism, and, close to my heart, distributism, a system I recently outlined in my video on economics. Given this complexity, the Italian political scientist Giovanni Sartori argues that it makes more sense to group political ideologies into families based on shared core principles rather than forcing them into an outdated and oversimplified spectrum. While the left-right spectrum oversimplifies political ideologies and fails to account for important distinctions, it also limits our approach to governance. According to the philosopher John Dewey, rigid ideological frameworks limit the scope of reasonable policy options and justify poor policies. How many times, for example, have you heard in a Democratic or Republican primary debate discussions about whether policy is truly left-wing or right-wing, rather than an assessment of whether or not that policy would actually work? The Russian-British philosopher Isaiah Berlin describes this phenomenon using an animal analogy. Most politicians are like hedgehogs, who see the world through a simple ideological lens. It is the foxes, however, who are capable of adapting to multiple perspectives, who truly govern well, since no single ideology can fully capture the complexities of modern society. Thus, in line with Berlin, Dewey argues that democracy should be a process of collaborative problem-solving rather than ideological fistfights. It is far better to take a practical approach to governance, using experimental policymaking practices at local levels to judge policies based on practical outcomes and objective data, rather than trying to force failing policies on a nation to save face ideologically. So, what's the solution? Given the limitations of the left-right spectrum and the consequences of rigid ideological thinking, we owe it to ourselves to move beyond these inaccurate labels. By focusing less on whether a policy is left-wing or right-wing, we can begin to assess policies based on their actual merits and real-world impact. This shift would allow us to prioritize effectiveness over ideological purity and open our minds to a broader range of ideas that have often been left behind by polarized political discourse. Ideas like distributism and post-liberalism, which don't fit neatly into a binary of left and right, offer innovative solutions that could address modern challenges. Why should we remain confined to predetermined, often outdated choices? Instead of being shackled by a spectrum that fails to capture the complexities of today's political landscape, we should embrace a more flexible, solutions-oriented approach, one that looks at policies through the lens of practicality and their ability to improve the lives of individuals, regardless of where those policies fall on the traditional political spectrum. We should encourage our politicians to be less concerned with ideological purity and more concerned with practical solutions that achieve concrete results. Only then will we see politics become less polarized and more collaborative, working for the best interests of all instead of the narrow interests of a powerful few. What do you think? Does the left-right spectrum still have any value? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when new videos are released. Also be sure to like this video so that YouTube recommends it to others. If you would like to support this channel for as little as $1 a month, you can also become a supporter on Patreon. Links in the description of this video. We all have the power to break free from outdated labels and look beyond the narrow divisions that so often hold us back. It's in our collective hands to push for a politics rooted in practicality, openness, and the pursuit of real solutions. Because when we open ourselves to the full spectrum of ideas, we unlock a future of endless possibilities. Together, let's move beyond labels, embrace the complexity of our world, and build a better tomorrow, one thoughtful decision at a time. Peace be with you. This has been The Philosopher.